Janet and Stuart have published their work since 1971, and they're recognised experts on witchcraft and the occult. Gavin joined them in 1993 and has since worked with them on The Pagan Path, which is a study of paganism worldwide, The Healing Craft, a healer's workbook for pagans, The Complete Dictionary of European Gods and Goddesses, and our most recent, The Inner Mysteries. To date, they've had 11 books published between them on the subjects mentioned in the United States, Britain, and as far afield as Brazil, Japan, and the Czech Republic. They were involved in setting up the Alliance of Progressive Covens and have links with several covens in the US, Italy, and the UK. They also run an open group in Ireland called, I believe, is Tiampal na Coleg.
Temple Natalia.
Ah, okay. I stand corrected. My Gaelic is not very good, which also includes an open worship group. Their current practical work is in the areas of spiritism and trance prophecy, and they regularly conduct practical workshops in these fields for the pagan community. Janet herself was initiated and trained in Alex Sanders' London Coven in the early 1970s, but is also a professional tarot reader and counsellor. She has training in Jungian psychology and Kabbalistic training in a magical lodge, also in the early 1970s. Gavin is an empathic healing medium, training in spiritual healing in the 1980s, and initiated into 3 different traditions of Wicca, including Seax Wicca and Alexandrian. He was also part of the traditional British shamanism revival in the UK during the 1980s, and also works as a tour guide, taking groups around the ancient sites of Ireland. Janet is registered in Ireland to do legal hand-fasting marriages by the Pagan Federation Ireland and the General Registry Office. Both of them believe that witchcraft is a tradition of healing and self-discovery, as well as an occult practice. It's not dogmatic by nature, but evolves according to culture and circumstance, and is a spirituality focusing around some of the most ancient magical practices of mankind. Tonight, they are talking to us on encounters with spirits and fairy folk. Gavin, Janet, over to you and welcome.
Thank you.
Everybody out there, if you believe in fairies,
It's a fairy thing.
that's a fairy thing. If you believe in fairies, clap your hands now. What I am going to tell you, and Gavin is going to tell you tonight, is a mixture of various aspects of fairy faith. Why do I believe in fairies? For the simple reason I've had quite a few encounters with them on a physical level. They are not just will-o'-the-wisps, pretty little creatures with wings on their backs. They can be as solid as you and me, and they can manifest in various ways. They can be benevolent and helpful and friendly, or they can be absolute little bastards. And sometimes they're a mixture of both. They like to be treated with respect, and in Ireland they're often called the gentry. These are the higher aspects of fairy people, and they are always rewarded when they help you. Over here they like whiskey, milk, butter, laid out on moonlit nights for them, when they will come and gather in your own garden to receive their presents, their treats. There is one lady who is listening into this. She is from Ireland. Her name is Michelle. She lived down the very place that we live in now, the same lane, the next house. I have known her since she was an unborn baby in her mother's womb. And as a little girl, she used to walk the lane down to the woods and into the bog, and she herself would encounter the fairy folk. And I think that's partly the reason why she became a witch herself, because as a young age, there was no question of, do you believe in fairies? She knew they were real, as I knew they were real. So let me start off with my first encounters. I came to Ireland in 1976. And you know the traditional idea of landing on this beautiful green island when the rain has softly fallen and there is a rainbow in the sky. That's exactly how it was on that May morning when I arrived here with Stuart, my husband. There was a fabulous rainbow, and it literally greeted the boat as we arrived. And I jokingly said to Stuart, "Oh my God, it's a fairy blessing." It was meant as a joke. Little did I know that within the space of 6 weeks, I'd get my first manifestation. Stuart and I, on a lovely hot summer day in 76, because it was a very hot summer here, and it was so beautiful, I thought I'd died and gone to heaven. Because luckily, the land we were on in County Wexford, in a place called Ferns, was owned by a Quaker family. And they farmed traditionally, no chemicals whatsoever. And the land loved them. I counted in those early 6 weeks over 1,000 different types of wildflower, over 2,500 butterflies, bugs, beetles, birds, etc. Bats in the night sky, moths at the window. It was paradise, absolute paradise. If you ever had an idea of fairyland, this was it. And so on that summer day at the end of May in 1976, I was out gardening and I heard this strange sound. It was all around me in the air. And I called Stuart out into the garden. I said, "What the hell do you think that is?" And he said, "I have no idea." It was overhead, it floated around, and it sounded like a woman in distress. And there she is, the Banshee herself.
Who's going to shop at the back and buy? Need anything, Mo?
No.
Right.
Yep, got it.
We lost you for a second. I don't know what that was all about. Anyway, there is the Banshee, traditional picture of her. She is not as horrid to look upon as she is in that picture. Some see her as a very beautiful woman combing her hair and weeping. But her voice is out of this world. It lasted for about 10 minutes. And Stuart and I still had no idea what we were hearing. Well, later on that day, it was early afternoon, we went down to the village to get some shopping. And as was custom back then, we stopped at the village pub for a pint. And the pub was full of farmers and horse breeders, the wealthy aristocrats of Ireland and the farming folk, discussing the fat stock prices and the blood stock prices. And one of them called down the bar to his friend, "Hey guys, did any of you hear the Banshee about half an hour ago?" And everyone went, "Oh yes." And then another voice piped up, who died?" "Oh, it was Molly Maguire down the road." "Ah, a Maguire, that would explain it." And then they carried on talking about cows and horses as if it was the most natural thing on earth. You see, in tradition, the Banshee belongs to two families, the O's and the Macs. And of course, there was Molly Maguire and one of the Macs. And this was her own personal Banshee. It is a sound once heard you never forget. It is both horrific and beautiful at the same time. And that's not the first time, or rather that's not the only time I ever heard her. I've heard her several times since. And that was my first encounter with Faerie Folk. Then that place we lived in Ferns, owned by that Quaker family, produced so much activity of the fairy nature, it was unbelievable. On one lovely evening, we had a coven by them. I had the French windows open, and it was a very still night, and yet suddenly past the French windows was the sound of a violent wind rushing along the ground. It wasn't in the air, it was ground level. And I said to Stuart, "What the hell is that?" One of my witches, he was a country lad from Donegal, he said, "Oh, I know what that was." He said, "That's a fairy wraith. It's the riders of the Sidhé." Now, the Sidhé are the gentry of the fairies. They are the old gods of Ireland. And this was them riding past the house on a fairy path. And the fairy path is very traditional here. And along that same fairy path where the fairies rode, we heard one night one of the most beautiful things I've ever encountered in fairyland. Olivia Robertson of the Fellowship of Isis was staying with us. And again, it was a summer night. We had that window open. And out of nowhere came the sound of a pipe, as if somebody was playing an oboe. It filled the air all around the little house that we lived in. And we looked at each other, and Olivia said, "Oh my God, Goddess, that's the fairy piper." Well, the entire coven and Olivia and myself and Stuart, we raced into the garden. And just outside that window was a very ancient oak tree. And the piping was coming up from under the roots of the oak tree. We sat there and we listened to the fairy piper for over 2 solid hours. Once you've heard the fairy piper, you never, ever forget it. So that's 3 examples of fairy. Yes.
So I moved to Ireland in '93. I'd had a few experiences in the UK, and one of the ones at that time when I was living in the UK in England, which still sticks with me, was actually the fairy piper, and that was up in Staffordshire. So these things aren't just, as we'll talk about later, aren't just within Ireland. We've had experiences we'll talk about later actually in New Zealand as well, of all places. And on this occasion with the fairy piper, it had been a group of us had been working quite late, magically, one night. And it was getting into the early hours of the morning when we began. Now, it was a cottage in the countryside out near Kings Bromley when we started to hear this music. And it was a case of one person looked at one person looked at the other and said, "Can you hear that?" "Yeah, I can hear that." "Can you hear that? That's pipe music." "Yeah, I can hear that." "Is that the neighbours?" "No, it's not the neighbours. This is a detached house." So we actually, there we are, and it's about half an hour before dawn. We're actually outside, walking the trackways in the countryside in Staffordshire, looking for this sound. And we start to follow it down this back trackway. And finally, we again, like Janet described, we come to this tree with these roots going down, and that's where the sound's coming from. And that's where it starts to get rather interesting, because I don't know why. I sort of crouched down under the tree and I was beneath a branch, and I just looked across this field, and I don't know why I wanted to look across this field. As I looked across, I could see this white dot. It was, by this time, it was about 10 minutes before sunrise, and the white dot was getting closer. There was no sound, and it was actually a barn owl, and it actually sat up on the branch above my head and looked down, turned around, and then flew all the way back. So that was one of the first actual tangible experiences I'd had. Before that, had really been just feelings.
There are other aspects, as I said, of fairy. One of them is the thing that I particularly love. Stuart always said he could never see them. Now, I got used to seeing them around that house in Wexford. They used to gather around a couple of apple trees in the garden. And you would sometimes, as the sun began to set, you would see them dancing around the apple tree. And in this case, there were 3 trees and 3 beautiful maidens, all with lovely flowing gowns and flowing hair, and they would just dance around the apple tree. As I said, poor old Stuart, he always said, "Well, I never see them, you know, it never happens for me." It did happen. It happened later, and it scared the bloody hell out of him. He lived in Mayo on the rough west coast of Ireland. And basically, our little cottage had on one side 200 square kilometres of bogland, bordered by a huge range of mountains called the Neffin Range. On the other side was the Atlantic Ocean. Well, to go into the mountain range, we had to drive across the bog. And on one particular evening, we went to see an American lady friend of ours there, and she'd invited us over for dinner. So we stayed there, we had a meal with her, and we had some wine, and then we drove back. Now, in the car, there was myself, Stuart, my father, my coven maiden, Virginia, and her mother. Now, all apart from my father, we were all craft, every single one of us. As we left her house, it was getting very dusk, and the light was beginning to fade. And suddenly, out of the bog, a strange shape began to arise. It was like tendrils of mist, coalesced around the car. Now, I don't know how many of you have seen the film Raiders of the Lost Ark. If you have, remember the sequence where the archangels come out of the Ark of the Covenant. And first they're extremely beautiful, and then they become demonic to look upon. That's exactly what the bog fairies look like. They decided, how dare you be on the bog? This is not for mankind. This is for the creatures of the bogland, for the wild heron, for the hare, the rabbit, the wild eel coming up from the Atlantic and crossing the bog in the little rivers. But it is not for mortals. And especially when you bring that noisy, smelly, disgusting mechanical thing with you. And they attacked the car. Stuart couldn't believe his eyes, because suddenly all over the roof of the car and the bonnet everywhere, there were women looking in, beautiful women. But then when they opened their mouths and growled at you, they had teeth which were long and sharp, and their fingernails made the same sound that you get if you pull a knife across a piece of glass. They scraped on the windows, they were hammering on the windows, trying to get in. Stuart was delighted with himself. I can see them, I can see them. Yes, Stuart, we can all see them. They're all over the bloody car. They're pulling on the windshield wipers. Keep driving, get off the bog. Oh, I want to stop the car and get out and look at them. Stuart, are you out of your bloody mind? Not damn likely you don't. Well, we persuaded him to carry on driving, and we cleared the bog, and the moment we cleared the bog, the spirits of the bog, the fairy folk there, pulled back and left us. And we drove home with Stuart going, I've seen them, I've actually seen them. That was one of the most expensive experiences we have ever had in this country, because the next morning when we got up, Stuart took one look at his car and he went, shit. All the windows on the car looked as if they'd been sandblasted. We had to replace every bloody window. Stuart was not happy about that, as you can well imagine. But that's the problem with the fairy folk. There are areas they don't like humans to go, and the bogs are sacred to them. You must remember at some stage in the past, the Druids used to put sacrifices in the bog, hence the bog people, which you now see in museums. They've always been associated with the otherworldly people. The Sealy Court, call it what you will. In Wales, of course, it's the Tylwyth Teg. Here it's the She, pronounced like the word she. They are very amoral in many ways. If you get on the good side of them, they will help you, as I've said. But there are certain aspects of fairy that really want nothing to do with us. And can you blame them? When you think of what we've done to this planet, which is their world as well, I'm not surprised there are areas they really don't want us to be. They also have a sense of humour. And sometimes that sense of humour can be very intriguing. Just down the road from where we live now, we're on a country lane, is the main road. And it runs from Mullingar to Kells and then all the way up to Dublin. Well, there was a group of us, there was myself and 3 lads, and we'd been down in the village for the afternoon, and we'd got some shopping, and again, we stopped off at the pub for a drink. And when we came back, it was about 5 o'clock in the evening, and it was coming up again to twilight. And we thought we'd take a shortcut across the field to the cottage. Bad move. The moment we stepped in the field, We walked towards the cottage. We could see the lights of the cottage, but there was absolutely no way we could find it. Because what we did, we stepped on a stray sod. And the stray sod is one of the fairies. Well, we walked and walked and walked. And of course, Muggins here forgot the first law. If you get caught by a stray sod, you take off your coat, your shirt, whatever, and you turn it inside out. And the moment you do that, you find your way home. We kept following that light to our cottage and we got no closer, and it got darker and darker and darker. It was no more than 300 or 400 yards from that main road to the cottage. Do you think we could find it? Not bloody likely. Eventually, we came out and there was a road. And we thought, well, where the hell are we? I went and knocked on a door and a farmer opened it. And I said, look, I know this is going to sound stupid. We live down Ethelstown Lane and we don't know where we are. And he looked at us and he said, Ethelstown Lane. I said, yes. Oh, he said, did you happen to cross a certain field? And I said, well, yes, we did. At the top of our lane, there's a field which is on the Mullingar Road. Stay there, he said. I'll get the car. He came and got the car and he piled us all into his car. He said, you know what you did? You stepped on a stray sod. Now, I'd heard of the stray sod. He said, I can tell you how I can tell you about that. My father made the same mistake in the same field. It took 6.5 hours to reach us. And I said, how far are we from our house? He said, well, let me put it this way. I'm driving you home. He drove us home, and it was a good couple of miles. And he said, by the way, you know you had to cross a river to get here. And we said, but there was no river. He said, well, that's the stray sod for you. You did cross the river. You just didn't realize it. Anyway, he drove us right to our front door and we all clambered out the car and our legs gave way. We literally couldn't stand up. And I said, I'm so exhausted. I said, I can hardly stand. My feet are killing me. And he laughed and he said, you've probably walked about the equivalent of 25 miles and not realized it. And that's what the stray sod can do. So you have to be very careful where you step in this country. And one of the laws with stray sods is quite simple. Carry sweeties in your pocket. If you put a sweetie in your mouth, apart from turning your shirt inside out, that also helps. Because there's one idea in Ireland that the stray sod is often a place where a victim fell during the famine years and died. And because of that, you feel incredible hunger. And it's the fairy reacting with you and making you pay for the death and suffering of whoever died in Ireland in the famine years, driven from their houses. So again, you have to be very careful. But sometimes something beautiful happens. And this is always one of my favorite stories. And I will never forget this. We lived very close to Dublin Airport at one stage. And we were renting a Georgian manor house. And beside the house was a long lane. And it went up to the fields. It was about 1/4 mile long. And when you got to the fields, at the end of that 1/4 mile, it was divided into 3. There was the main field directly in front of us, which was the cornfield. On the left-hand side was a field left fallow. And on the right-hand side was a field that was also fallow, but was full of wild garlic. There, under a tree, I encountered the most amazing fairies I've ever met. I had with me on that occasion the family dogs, 1 boxer and 3 whippets, and my dog, which was a mutt. One of the whippets, a little thing called Bluebell, had gone blind as a puppy. She'd had a blow on the head. She couldn't keep up with the other dogs who ran ahead. So she used to put her little nose up against my leg and just trundle along beside me. Well, when I got to those 3 fields, in that field with the wild garlic, I suddenly saw a woman. Now, my first reaction was it must be some kind of fancy dress or something like that. She was stunningly beautiful. She was wearing a verdigris green dress. She had jet black hair braided in 3 braids, 1 down the back and 2 down the front. Around her forehead was a band, a fillet of solid red gold. The eyes gold that you only find in the Wicklow Mountains or in the Welsh Mountains. Around her arms were bracelets of a similar gold. And she had the sweetest, most gentle, loving face. The only interesting difference was her hands. When you look at a human hand and look at the length of our fingers, imagine a being with fingers 3 or 4 times as long as my fingers are. Elegant and tapered. Stood there and smiled. The dogs went absolutely berserk and raced towards her through the garlic patch. Even little Bluebell staggered along trying to keep up with them. And they were jumping all over her. And she just smiled at them and she spoke in ancient Gaelic. Now, I can speak some modern Gaelic, but I don't really understand ancient Gaelic. But I understood every word she said. She talked of life and of humour and of love and the family and the preservation of the earth and how important it was for future generations. Conservation's fairy. Well, the dogs were going crazy and the wild garlic came alive around her. Sparks of white light flew up and danced all over her dress. And without even bending down, she extended her hands and they climbed up her wrists, over her bracelets and up the front of her gown. And she stroked all the little dogs, including Bluebell. She placed her hand over Bluebell's eyes and with one movement, just gently pushed her hand backwards and forwards. And then, like a heat haze on a summer day, she shimmered and disappeared into thin air. Well, I grabbed Bluebell under one arm and I raced down the lane back to the house because that afternoon we were having a coven meeting and all the coveners had already assembled. I had Bluebell under one arm and the other dogs were racing along beside me. And I came back and I told everybody about my encounter with the lady of the Tuatha De Danann, the people, the children of the goddess Dana. She was one of the lords and ladies of the gentry. She was one of the queens of the Tuatha De Danann. Everyone accepted my story. And they said, well, we're so used to things happening, nothing surprises us. But the surprise came the next morning. Ginny, my coven maiden, lived with us, and she kept horses. And Bluebell was actually her dog, as were the other little whippets. And she'd always get up at 5 o'clock in the morning and let the dogs run around on the lawn outside while she tended the horses. Well, Stuart and I were woken up by pebbles being thrown at the bedroom window, and Ginny saying, Stuart, Janet, open the window. You've got to see this. You've got to see this. So we staggered out of bed wondering what the hell had happened. And then we saw it. Bluebell was running around as if she had sight. She was playing with the other dogs. I'd never seen anything like it with her. We were all amazed. So later on, about 9 o'clock, we took Bluebell down to our local vet. And the veterinarian examined Bluebell and he said, I don't understand this. She's got cataracts on her eyes. She's always had cataracts on her eyes. But she's got 100% vision. That's impossible. This dog can see even though she has cataracts. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the magic of fairy.
So, first time I came to Ireland was 92, and I went up to Coleraine. And I was staying again in a friend's cottage up there. And it was, Irish cottages are long. Often you'll have, at the end room, you'll have 3 windows and a door on one wall and 3 windows on the other. And it would be a long room. And it was a room like that. And it was coming on to twilight. And I still remember it because there were these window at the end of the room looking out into the garden. There was actually an tree. And my friend Diane, she's sitting opposite, she's reading a book, and I'm looking out the window, and these, as I'm watching, there are these 2 lights appear in the apple tree, and they're dancing around. And it's a warm summer's evening, and then you've got to realise in Ireland we do not have fireflies, we do not have any form of firebugs. these separate, and it's like they're dawdling from the tree towards the window until they get to the window, and they come through the window, and I watch them, and it's like I can't hear it. I can feel like this humming noise. It's like a lee, 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 lee. And they go through. They go through the door, into the passageway, into the kitchen, and out the window that side. So I'm a bit stunned for about a couple of minutes, and then I just say to Diane, who's opposite, "It gets busy in here at night, Diane, doesn't it?" And she doesn't even look up. She says, "Yeah, they always come through here at this time," and she just carries on reading. This was, for her, like you find with a lot of people here in Ireland, this is completely normal, particularly out in the countryside. It sort of died off a little bit over the years as the areas in Ireland become more urbanized. But once you get from where we live out into the deeper countryside here, things are out there, things happen. And that's one of the things I discovered when coming to Ireland is the belief here is very strong, and you experience things. It stops being about belief because you start to experience.
So much so, Trinity College in Dublin has an entire archive of people who have experiences. And these are everyone from police officers to college professors.
It started back in the 70s that they wanted to record all the old fairy stories. So they sent these kids home from the schools. They said, what we want you to do is go and talk to your grandparents about what they know about the fairies and fairy stories and collect them. Well, we're still doing it in the 2000s, still collecting these stories. And they were expecting old stories going back to the Victorian period. It's not what they got. What they got were continual stories, modern stories. And these were people saying, look, this actually happened. It wasn't a case of kissing the Blarney Stone as such. These were actual people having experiences. And that's one of the things you've come across here. And I think what highlights this is it's not just an experience of the people here, it's the people that visit. So after I'd moved over here, it was around about late 90s. And a friend of mine who's a biker, he comes across to Ireland, he brings two friends with him. And, well, they decide, his two friends, which I'm chatting with my mate, and his two friends want to get on their bikes and have a whiz around the countryside. So they decide to shoot off around the countryside. So excuse me, I'm just finding a picture at the moment. So I'm chatting around with my mate, catching up on old times. And they come back about an hour later. And they're really quiet. Very quiet, in fact. Because they've actually seen something. And there's a pause in conversation. I say to them, so how was the ride? And they said, well, we saw something. I said, what do you mean? Well, we did what you said. We went to the end of the lane. We drove down the main road. Then we turned left and we went down the little lane, which at a place called Gurley. And we stopped on the edge of this field. And we were just having a cigarette. And we looked across this field and we saw this big black cat. Now, when I lived in England, I was very interested in things like Black Shuck, the big black dog, come across in the West Country. And, of course, the Beast of Bodmin, Surrey Puma. So I assumed that's what they'd seen. And I said, wow, this sounds like Surrey Puma, Beast of Bodmin. They said, no, we don't think so. I said, why? And they said, well, this big black cat, it wandered across the field, and then it stood up on its hind legs, and its head went round and looked at us, and it walked into this hill. Now, the hill they were talking about is well known locally as a fairy rah. It's actually got these gnarled thorn trees on. What was most interesting is they didn't realise what they'd seen, which is absolutely fascinating, because what they'd seen was the puka, because it was late summer. Now, the puka is almost like a weird creature. It can take different forms. So I've got a picture here of the goat form. but also it can take the form of a cat. It can take the form of a big rabbit. And actually, if any of you live North Hampshire, around Lithook, there's a story of a large white cow, which is actually basically a puka around Lithook, and people see it. So what they'd seen was the puka. But the funny thing is they had no idea what it was they'd actually seen. Now, these were very grounded, earthy people. They were the sort of people who were making things up. They certainly hadn't dropped any acid, for anybody who thinks that. And there they were, seeing that around the countryside.
Scared the bejesus out of them.
It scared the hell out of them because they had no idea what they'd seen. And later on, we actually had a phone call because somebody was having a problem with something which sounded like a puka around buildings where they lived. The puka tends to appear later in the summer. Traditionally, tends to haunt places around about Samhain.
And the interesting thing is the fact it disappeared into a fairy Ra with the thorn trees. There is in Ireland a tradition. The lone hawthorn tree in the middle of a field should never be cut down. It belongs to the fairy folk. And you will still, if you visit Ireland, see those lone thorn trees in an otherwise ploughed field. There was one famous man in the north of Ireland who made the biggest damn boo-boo. He decided to build a factory.
Car factory.
It was a car factory. And as he was looking at the map and the plan for it, he saw that there was a hawthorn tree in the way. And he demanded the tree be removed, cut down. Well, the locals said, you can't do that, you'll upset the fairy folk. And he basically said, oh, what a load of bullshit. And he got in foreign workers and they, sure enough, cut down the tree and they built the factory. That gentleman built his car factory and history relates what happened.
He went through hell for 10 years.
His name was John DeLorean. Moral of the story, don't cut the fairy tree.
Now, that tradition here related to the fairy tree, we know goes all the way back because you find, and in Britain as well, although that's been lost, but it certainly existed going back to the 13th century, because there is the story of Thomas the Rhymer, where in the traditional ballad, which Walter Scott rewrote later on, where it talks about the thorn tree and that the land will be safe as long as the thorn tree is there, the fairy tree. Now, if you go to Iceland, you have a similar story, and you have basically the elf stones. And I remember seeing a documentary on this where they actually had gone to Iceland to interview the elf woman, and the elf woman had been called a bit. The story was basically a fact, like John DeLorean, the factory was being built and they were going to put in a car park, and she'd actually warned them not to do it because there were these stones and they were going to move them. And once they started to move them, and the manager of the site who was doing the building work was going up steps at the time, and the moment they started to move the boulders, the steps actually gave way under him, at which point he started listening to the actual elf woman. And now there's another place, actually, which we came across another story like this. And this was told to us by somebody who was there at the time, who was on the base. And that, would you believe, was actually on Oahu in Hawaii. And at the time, they were extending one of the runways of one of the naval airfields, or it could have been US Air Force. And what had happened is the local native, I wouldn't say, I don't know if the term is kahuna or not, I may be wrong. That might be a modern term. This local kahuna came along when they were planning to do the runway, and they were clearing the area. He said, you can't do that. That's tapu tapu. That's taboo. If you do that, you'll have nothing but trouble. But you pay me $200 and I will come in and I will do the ceremony and I will clear it for you. And they just laughed at him and shuffled him off the base. Well, that night, the security patrol went round and they found all this machinery overturned. They had no idea who had got on there. There was no sign of anybody getting onto the base where they were building the runway. So the local kahuna hears about it, comes onto the base and says, here, you had problems. I did try to tell you, but if you want me to sort this out for you, if you want me to appease the spirits, it will cost you $500. The price kept going up, quite simply because he was trying to warn them and they weren't listening and he felt it was disrespectful. So they ignore him again. And the next night, they had the security patrol there. They turned their backs literally for seconds. And again, machinery is turned on its side. Kahuna turns up on base. They arrest him. They want to know who's behind it, who he's got involved with this, how they got onto the base. And he's saying, no, wasn't me. You're being very disrespectful. This is going to cost you $1,000. In the end, after they have him in a cell and he's saying it's going to happen again tonight. Doesn't matter what you do, it's going to happen. They turn the machinery over again. The spirit's there. In the end, they pay him $2,000 to do the ritual, the ceremony, to appease them because they weren't listening. And that's one of the things you learn, and I've learned that in Ireland, and I'm going to talk about that. You listen when you are told about places where you go to and where you don't go to and at what times. Particularly here, the fairy folk like particular times a day, particular places, and those are their places. Janet mentioned the bog. But there are certain fairy Rahs, fairy forts, which are like ring forts, fairy mounds, fairy trees. Each has often its own particular folklore associated with it. And yes, going offerings during the day. There's some places you just don't go to at twilight. And I'm going to talk about a woman who came to Ireland. I'm going to, out of politeness, I'm not going to mention the woman's name. She thought she knew about fairies. She came to Ireland.
She brought a tour party with her.
She brought a tour party with her. She'd written books on fairy lore, but had never been to Ireland before. And so I wasn't tour guiding at the time. I handed her over to a friend of mine who lives here. Now, she decided she wanted to go to this one site, which is down basically near Tipperary. It's called Grainstone Circle. Now, the place is on a place called Loch Gur, Loch being a lake. And it's got a bit of a reputation. You get cattle mutilations around there. Strange things happening. The local lord in the area was associated with Satanism and devil worship as well, going back to the 19th century. Well, this woman, throughout the day, she said, well, I want to be at Grainstone Circle for twilight. My friend said, no, you do not go there at that time. Any other time. I'll schedule you for you to get there at 4 o'clock before it starts to get dark. Well, as the day goes on, my friend began to realize this woman really didn't know much. At one point, they're driving along the riverside. She's pointing out to these mounds along the riverside, saying, of course, these are burial sites. Well, actually, it was just tippings where they'd been dredging the river. So he had to sort of put her right, which didn't make him popular. So finally, they get down to Tipperary to Grainstone Circle. Now, this is a big stone circle. You could get about 4 houses, reasonable sized houses in the middle of it. It's a big place. And it's twilight. Now, the bus pulls up. They're in tour group. My friend's going, sorry, I'm not going in there with you. Now, by this time, quite a few of the tour party had realized they needed to listen to him, so they stayed in. But this woman and 3 of her friends decided they were all going to dress up in their own robes, get their magical tools and stuffs. And there they are wandering down the trackway, and they go in. And my friend is sitting there, and he's literally got a watch. And he says, I give them 15 minutes. So literally 13 minutes later, 13, 14, he heard the screams. because for once in their life, this woman had invoked the fairies and they turned up. And they were not what she expected. What my friend sees is these women running down. They're literally hitching up their robes. There's magical tools falling out their arms, and they're running to the back of the minibus. They get into the bus, and the woman who's behind the tour group who organised the ritual, she is literally rocking with her thumb in her mouth. And one of them starts to describe what they saw. They went in to the stone circle, they set everything up, they started to do the invocations, and they said it was like a grey mist. It literally came out the stones and started to push down on them. And pushed right down on them. Now I've actually seen that. It's etheric. I've seen it as a healer, but I've actually seen it around things and as a form moving here. And it was pushing right down on them. Now, it doesn't actually end there, because when the bus driver goes to turn the key in the bus, the engine won't turn over. It's just nothing's happening. Now, even more amusing is a police car, a Garda car comes along. The Garda car, the guy winds down the window and says, I won't stay around here at night, and just shoots off.
Even the cops won't go there.
Even the cops aren't staying around. And so my friend, Glenn, he's pretty knows what to do. And there was a traditional way of dealing with things like this. Remember, Janet mentioned before, they're amoral. They're quite animal-like in their attitude. So he did the traditional fairy banishing in Ireland. He hung out the back of the minibus, shaking his stick, going, fuck off, you little bastards. Which is half the time what you've got to do when you're not appeasing them. If you're having a problem like that, is it's about showing strength, which is what he did. Do you want to get that quick?
Oh, shit.
There's somebody at the door. At which point the driver turns the key in the bus, and that's it. The engine starts, and boom, off they go. But this woman was convinced she knew what fairies were about, and that was really what I was like when I came here in Ireland. I thought I knew what they were about. I really did. And this beautiful idea of beautiful gossamer winged, where they can be friendly and you're going to be able to work with them, isn't the case. They will come to you when they want something, or in many cases, you go to them because they are causing a problem. And that has been one of the things about being witches here in Ireland. When you're a witch in Ireland, in the countryside, you don't get a brick through the window. What you get is somebody knocking on the door, asking for help.
Gavin,
What?
you'll have to come and talk to the lad at the door. It's important.
I'll hand you over to Janet. Hang on.
You need instructions.
Why?
We've got to look after Bruno for a couple of days.
Oh, no.
Yes, I'm afraid so. Sorry about that. It's our neighbour. We're going away and we've got to look after a very large doggy for a couple of days. Anyway, I'll let Gavin come back to you on this one in a minute. He's at the front door going, no, 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 no. It never rains, it just pours in the countryside. So, okay, while we're waiting for Gavin, after he's finished, we're going to talk about other people's experiences and rather a beautiful story of the fairy folk again, which involves the police in this country, and it is very, very beautiful. And some people would say it's tragic, but actually I think it's wonderful. It's the kind of get your handkerchiefs out, ladies, because you're going to cry buckets for this one. It's very emotional and very, very moving. So, okay, where are we? Oh, yes, and the other thing we're going to talk to you about is an experience we had with the Maoris, which was really fascinating because that involved the biggest manifestation we've ever seen in our entire life. We're talking over 200 spirits in one go. It was massive. And again, it's one of those things you don't forget. And the funny thing is, I told my own doctor about it when we came back here, and he said, blimey, if I'd have been there, he said, I'd have run for dear life.
Where was that?
As I was saying, I'm going to tell them something later about
So
New Zealand.
I believe I was saying something about being a witch and people knocking on the door wanting help.
So we're feeding Bruno.
So we're feeding Bruno.
You know where to get his food and all that. Okay.
So
Twice a day.
Yeah.
Once morning, once evening.
So what you I'll go a bit more into what fairies are at the moment, but one of the things that I found interesting is the amount of time we get knock on the door like that. There was this one occasion we had this farmer knock on the door. There he was, Irish farmer, woolly boots, beaten up old 4-wheel drive. And the first thing he asked us was, "Are you witches?" And we said, "Yes." He said, "Oh, I'm not insulting you by calling you witch." And we said, "No, no, no." And he said, "Well, I've got this problem with my cattle." We went, "Oh, okay. Do you want to come in?" So he took his boots off and he came in and he sat down. We gave him a cup of tea. He said, "So what's the problem?" And he said, "Well, my cattle, they're drowning themselves." And we said, "What do you mean drowning?" He said, "Well, they're going up to the river and they're sticking their heads in and they're drowning themselves." And we thought, okay. So have you been to the vet? And he said, "Oh, I've been to the vet." He doesn't know why they're doing it, what's going on. And it's just not just the cattle, it's the sheep. Well, somebody's dog is barking. So we went, okay. Have you been to, so you think this is something else going on? He said, yes. I said, okay. Have you been to the local priest? Yes. What did he do? What did he say? He said, "Oh, he sent me to you." Okay. So tell me where you are. He says, "Well, I'm at a place called Farrar, just down the road there." And he said, I said to him, "So tell me anything strange." He said, "Well, on my land, I've got a big hill." I said, okay. Anything happen on that? Because at the moment he said hill, I thought, oh, sounds like a fairy ra, and I was right. I said, anything interesting happen on there? And he said, "Well, we had some of those evangelicals." What you mean, evangelical Christians? He said, yeah. And okay. And they were claiming Ireland for Christ because Ireland is heathen. I said, "What did they do up there?" "Oh, they stuck crosses into the ground." I said, okay, well, let us come up and have a look. So we went to Farrar to look at this place. And this isn't actually Farrar, but this is what sort of place you're looking at. And he was right, they had stuck these crosses in. And the first thing that hit us, that this was most definitely a fairy ra, plus there were various myths about the site related to a local saint as well. And we said, right, what we're going to need to do is appease the Fae here. So what we did is actually go up, and it was surrounded like this. You see the thorn trees, that's one of the giveaways for these sites. We were actually putting ribbons on and leaving offerings. I ended up leaving the traditional offerings of butter and a whole bottle of whiskey, which he was very dismayed at. And what we did is made sure that he did that actually annually to appease the fairy folk as such. So this is what happens here. People knock on the door and want help. The other place we went to was a place where people came to us because they were having problems with their horses. And horses are incredibly sensitive. I don't know if anybody owns any horses here. They're incredibly sensitive to anything psychic or spiritual. And we got asked to go and have a look at the horses. They thought the place was haunted. And what it was actually on a fairy path. Now, I had to actually divert the energy from the fairy path. Now, the fairy path is actually the oldest name that we have for a ley line. The term ley line only goes back to the 1920s, for 1920s antiquarian. But a fairy path is actually really a ley line. And these, again, you come across them in Irish fairy mythology, where traditionally they're pathways where the fairy is supposed to host, to travel along. And I do actually have another image for that somewhere. Nope. I'm looking for it. I'm looking for it. There we go. So let me just bring that up. So traditionally you have the fairy path. Now there's several traditions here in Ireland about those, about building on fairy paths. And one of them is where you will, if you're planning to build a house, or if you are going to do an extension to your house, you would traditionally cut a piece of turf, a piece of grass, and you would turn it upside down. If you come back the next day and it has been turned back upright, then the fairies have said, don't build there. They haven't given permission. Now, not far from us is a place called Loch Crew. And again, there's several burial mounds there, and there's a story of a house there. And I still remember this happening, where they built an extension on their house, and they didn't actually do that. And they were getting woken up in the middle of the night by potatoes and rocks being thrown at the extension. They actually called out the police, the guards, to look, to see where this was coming from. They never caught anybody. And in the end, they had to bring somebody out to actually appease the Fae in the area for that reason. So again, you have this idea of the fairy path, which is really a ley line, and they actually work the same way as such, energy traveling along them. Okay.
So here we come to the sad story. As I said, ladies, get your handkerchiefs out. The same place where I'd had fairy experiences on the west coast of Ireland, on that bog with the bog fairies that upset Stuart's car. It was a little village called Ballycroy. Now, Ballycroy, if you blinked, you'd miss it, because it's a straight stretch of road. It's a nightmare from a place called Mulranny to Bangor Erris, and it's about 30 miles in length. And there's nothing except in the middle is the tiny village of Ballycroy. Now, Stuart and I lived in Ballycroy for 18 months, and this was in the late 70s. I better explain about Ballycroy. It was total bogland, but on that one road was the one building, and that building was, wait for it, the post office, the village pub, the village shop, the undertaker, the fish market, and the vegetable market. And it was also the police station, because there was only one police officer for 200 square. And bless his heart, he had a beautiful big house on the bog, but there was no crime in the village. He wasn't interested in the illegal brewing of poteen. He knew where all the stills were, and as far as he was concerned, give me the poteen and I'll ignore it. Well, his day would always start 9 o'clock in the morning. He'd be down in the pub, and he'd spend the entire day there. So after Stuart and I moved in, we used to go and get our shopping in the little village shop, and we'd have a drink in the pub. And the police officer's name, the guard's name, was Tom Chambers. Now, Tom's father had been the police officer before him. So anyway, we'd been going to the pub a couple of times, and Tom would be sitting there with his pint of Guinness. And he said, you write on folklore and stuff, don't you? And we said, yeah, that's right. He said, see the old man sitting at the end of the bar? Which one? Oh, that one there. He said, yes, he's the oldest inhabitant. He's about 90 years old. Oh, really? So he's got a glass of Guinness in front of him. Go and ask if you can buy him another glass of Guinness. So we politely introduced ourselves to the senior citizen and offered to buy him a glass of Guinness. And he put his hand over the top. He said, no, I only have one glass for the whole day. Oh, okay, we said, hope we haven't offended you. He said, oh, no. He said, I suppose you want to hear my story. And we said, well, yes. He said, I'll tell you why I only have one glass of Guinness. He said, my parents, they were farmers here, sheep farmers. And as you know yourselves, we take our sheep in the summer and we send them up into the Neffingbeg Mountains and they graze up there. And in the winter at Samhain, at Halloween, we bring them back down again and we corral them for the winter. Well, after my parents died, my older brother went up to Dublin and he studied at university up there at Trinity College, and I inherited the sheep farm. He said, I never got married at that stage. He said, because I was a bit shy about women. He said, but I'll tell you one thing. He said, one day, he said, you see me collie dog, because back then you used to be able to take your little collie dog into the pub with you. He said, not this one I've got now. He said, the one I used to have, nice Welsh border collie. That was my sheepdog. He said, oh, she was a bitch. I tried to train her, God knows how many times, but she was always all over the place. He said, but one day, he said, I was walking along the beach and coming towards me, he said, the most beautiful girl I'd ever seen in my life. He said, and my dog fell in love with her, raced over and was jumping all over her. And he said, I've never seen anything like it. She told my dog to sit and the damn animal sat. He said, well, anyway, I was a bit shy of talking to her because she was so lovely. He said, but she was nice. And she said, well, you know, I'll be here tomorrow. Bring your dog down and I'll show you a few tricks of training him. So anyway, he met up with her the next day and one thing led to another, and the dog did extremely well. So bloody well that everybody wanted to borrow his sheepdog to bring their sheep to the summer pastures and down again. Well, as you can imagine, one thing led to another and they fell in love. And it was a beautiful love story, but it was unusual. You see, nobody in the village knew where she came from, but they all guessed her secret. On her wedding day in the little church, she had a tiny box in her hand. And as they said their vows to each other, she gave the box to him. And she said, you know what's in here? And when the time comes, you'll know what to do with it. So they married. They went back to the little cottage that he owned, and he put the tiny box on the mantelpiece over the fireplace in the kitchen. And there it stayed for years. And they had children of their own, a couple of boys and a girl. And the mother sent the children up to Dublin to be educated at the university. And she and her husband were growing old together. But then she started to get restless. And she'd walk up and down at night in the cottage. They had no electricity back then. Everything was done with paraffin lamps and candles. One night, a great storm blew in on the Atlantic Ocean. Now, the storms on the bog, and I've experienced them there, they're hurricane force. This was a vicious storm, and she became more and more agitated. And she got up, and she lit a candle, and she put it in the window of the cottage. And she said, it's time. It's time now, I have to go. And he said, yes, I know, my love, I know. He gave her one farewell kiss, and she walked out into the storm. All night long, he sat and watched the candle burn and looked out of the window. And with the dawn, the storm blew away. And our Garda, police officer's father, who, as I said, had been a police officer before him, came and knocked on the door of his cottage early in the morning and said to him, I've got some bad news for you. I don't know how to tell you this. And the old man said, you don't have to tell me, I know, show me where she is. And so the police officer walked the old man way down onto the beach. And there, lying on the beach, looking incredibly peaceful and beautiful, was his lovely bride. She had the sweetest smile on her face, but she was dead. And there, way out in the ocean, was a single grey Atlantic seal. Now, I know that bay, and seals do not come into that bay. But there was a seal watching him. The old man carried in his pocket that funny little box that he had over the mantelpiece. He stood at the edge of the sea, and Tom's father pulled back out of politeness. The old man opened the box and reached in, and he pulled out something, and he threw it into the ocean to the seal. And the seal came up and caught it. bowed to him and dived under the waves and disappeared and was gone. The old man said to Tom's father, they'll bury her in the churchyard, but she's not there, you know. She's out in the water with her people. You saw her, didn't you? That's my wife. She was a sealkie. You knew that, didn't you? She was a seal woman. And Tom's father said, we all knew that. He said, she's at peace now. She's with her people. And one day a great storm will come up off the Atlantic Ocean. When it does, you won't find me the next morning. Well, not in the cottage. I'll be out there in the ocean. I'll join her. I'll be one with the seal people. And that was why he only drinks 1 glass of Guinness a day. As he said, one day when the storm comes, I'll hear her calling me. I don't want to be drunk. I might miss her lovely call. I couldn't bear to hear anything but her voice on a night like that. And that's why I'll never be drunk again. And I'll only have 1 glass of Guinness every day. And he stuck to that. It's a beautiful story, but it doesn't end there. Stuart and I left Ballycroy and we came to live up here. And Gavin came and joined us. And one day there was a knock on the front door.
That was Tom Chambers came to visit.
It was Tom Chambers, the son of the original guard. And Gavin remembers this. And we said, Tom, it's wonderful to see you. Come on in, have a cup of tea, have a whiskey, etc. And we sat chatting. And I said, how's the old gentleman with the woman, the wife, the seal wife? And he went, ah. He said, right, I better tell you something. He said, it was last year. He said, it must have been 99 at that stage. He said, there was a huge, great storm blowing off the Atlantic that night. He said, I just knew. He said, I got up first thing in the morning when the storm blew out again, and I went to his cottage. He said, there was just a single candle burning in the window, and the door was open. He wasn't there, but I knew where he was. He said, I walked down to the Strand, just to the place my father had been when we found her. And there he was, lying on the beach. He was dead, but he had the most beautiful smile on his face. And he said, I looked up, and there, just ahead of me in the ocean, were 2 grey seals swimming round and round and round each other. And they rose up out of the waves, and they bowed their heads to him, and then they dived together under the waves and were never seen again. And that's a true story.
Somebody was asking about what was in the box.
In the box is the little sealskin cap. It is said that when a sealkie leaves the ocean, if she marries a mortal, she will take her little sealskin hat and give it to the mortal that she loves until the day when she hears the calling of her people and has to return to the ocean. And then, if he truly loves her, he'll throw the cap back so she can wear it once again as she turns back to be a seal.
So
I hope you liked that story. Put your thumbs up if you did.
So we're going to open up some questions.
Oh, not quite.
Yeah, we'll get to that in a minute.
Okay.
To open up for a few questions if anybody wants to type anything in.
Back in 1 second.
Okay, so if you actually type in your question.
Yep. Yeah, basically use the chat window, folks, and type in any questions.
Somebody was saying about Michelle, about the story from Donegal. You will find similar stories you will find them in Scotland, Ireland. You'll even find them in Greenland and Newfoundland. So yeah, it's a common story of the fisherman marrying a selkie.
Or a farmer in this case. Or a
farmer in this case.
Yeah.
And so these stories are still alive, particularly not much on the east coast here in Ireland, but certainly on the west coast. And certainly up until the 90s. But then we got a really bad dose of affluenza here, where everybody got very money orientated, and these stories sort of disappeared. People became a bit more cynical about it. I think we've been lucky in the fact that people go, okay, they're witches, we can talk to them about this. So people will come here and talk to us about these things. Somebody was asking, are poltergeists and the Fae similar, do you think? Well, Ireland's got a reputation for ghosts. This was from Jerry's iPad. So, no, they're very, very different things, which is lead us on to the next question, next section anyway, in a minute. Poltergeists are generally associated with teenagers going through puberty, giving off psychic energy as such. And what happens is there's the famous one in England, that occurred, which hit all the papers, and there was a documentary about it recently.
Oh yes, Enfield, the Enfield poltergeist.
Yes.
The story was good until those two American idiots turned up. Sorry, but there were two. I know who those people are as well from having met some people who know them. Yes, there was something genuinely going on there. So poltergeist activity is always related to that. Fae, we're talking about elemental spirits. Now, what the Fae basically are, so we'll get into this.
Well, we'll do that in a minute.
We'll do that. Actually, we'll do that in a minute.
What I want
but no, more questions.
Oh.
Yeah, you've got one from Craig.
Now, I can't say what the First Nation tribes called them in America, but I can tell you, I do actually believe there is a link with the Hopi and the concept of the Kachinas. Susanna, but I am not an expert by any means on Native American First Nation tribes. I haven't come across any similar Selkie stories.
By the way, Michael, yes, it is also the hungry grass.
So let's talk about.
Hang on, I just want to go through a couple of.
Janet wants to go a couple of little stories as well.
Well, no, just this here. The kind of people who've experienced and have written about experiences with fairies. One was William Blake, who experienced in his own garden a fairy funeral and recorded everything he'd seen. And you can find that on the internet. The other was on a BBC programme. It was one of the head gardeners at Kew Gardens who was walking through the gardens one day, and he sat down on a bench, and suddenly he looked in front of him, and under a tree was a fawn, little horns, goat legs, etc. And of course, he couldn't believe what he was seeing. And the fawn looked at him and he said, "My God, you can see me." And he went, "Well, yes." And they got into a conversation, and the fawn explained that this is my tree and it's my job to look after it, etc. And I've been watching the work you've been doing here in the gardens, and thank you very much. And the man basically said he wouldn't have believed it unless he'd seen it. And he was one of the head botanists at Kew Gardens in England. So, you know, they literally all over the place. Another one is interesting. Quite a few of Irish musicians have encountered the Lannon She. Now, the Lannon She is very beautiful.
It's the muse.
She's the muse. And in Irish legend, the Lannon She will inspire you. She will bring out the poet in you, the musician, the artist. But unfortunately, you'll have a very short life afterwards. She's like a vampire. She draws your energy.
It's the artist anima which takes control. So they're logical. You could go through a whole list: Janis Joplin, Jim Morrison, who all you could say ultimately were destroyed by the anima, the Lannon She, for that reason. Somebody was asking about changelings.
So before that one, Gav, on page 17, Amy Gonzalez asking about the property in Saltash, Cornwall, and communicating with something there, 6 feet tall, hairy, with small horns.
Sounds like a puka.
Yeah, that's a puka.
There's different names for them in different places.
She does ask if you've got...
Right. I would go and look up the history of the area. And generally, one of the experiences we've had is pukas hanging around buildings. So they tend to be associated with areas of land where somebody's put a house and they've been misplaced. So told me to call it ergo, which is ogre backwards. Yeah, it definitely sounds like a puka.
One law, yes, I was going to say, to deal with it, Be polite to it, leave out some milk for it, but also tell it the next time you see it that after the 1st of September, you will not eat blackberries on your land because your blackberries then belong to the puka. And if you do eat them, the puka will be so upset he'll piss all over them. So what you do is you say to the puka, if you respect my land, I will respect your fruits. So after the 1st of September, puka, the blackberries belong to you and I will not touch them. And here is some milk. That should keep him happy for a while.
It's about, right, you're infringing in his territory, not the other way around. So it's, in these cases, it's appeasement. Simple as that. So the spirit was there first, which I'll get onto when I talk about what they are. Somebody was asking about changelings. Yes, there are records. I mean, the most famous one is Bridget Cleary, which was said to have been possessed.
Are you a witch? Are you a fairy? Or are you the child or the wife of Michael Cleary? Is that the husband burnt her to death by sitting her on the stove and
that was basically end of the 19th century. That's the play. It was not a witch burning.
No.
It was a fairy possession, and it was actually performed by the local doctor and priest together, who sat her on a range when it was a light. It was nasty.
It's known as the Clonmel witch burning.
As for the one with children, that's really mythology, and it was a way of explaining children who were born who were different, often with Down syndrome and other genetic problems. So that is really, so that was where the changeling story came from. Was it really related to those former spirits? No. But yes, they are recorded for that reason. So it wasn't anything really to do with spirits itself, the original changeling myth. That's where it came from.
Somebody said their brother said he'd come back as a silky. Yes, you can hear them sing, but and I'm sure he's a very nice guy, but he's not going to come back as a silky. You're born a silky, or you don't, or you're not born a silky. You know, there's no happy medium. And if you try to become a silky, you'll drown. Simple as that.
Emma Bradley, running visitations of Faerie or the Puka could be an explanation for all the stories of the devil visiting people in the bar. This is about interpretation. Right. So I'm going to get straight onto this. This is about interpretation of what it is you are seeing. And I'm going to give an example because the reason we don't see stories of Fae so much is because of something else that is occurring. I've got to get the image because it's about really how you interpret these spirits is about culture.
Oh, there's the Lanonshi.
No, they can't see that.
Oh.
No, I'm just finding, right. So I'm just getting that ready. I'm just getting an image ready. So let's talk about what they are. So what you are talking about when you specifically talk about Fae, there are two forms. The first form is the lower, what people say is the lower form. What you are talking about is animism, where these are spirits of the land, where they are spirits of plant, of tree, of rock, of the land itself. And what happens, different cultures put a different cultural overlay to them. Over a period of time, that cultural image of them becomes ingrained, and that is what people see. So they're spirits. Now, when you meet a person, their intelligence is on a physical level. But these creatures, their intelligence is on a different level to us. So you come across a tree, you don't see the intelligence of the tree. The intelligence is on an astral level. But occasionally it manifests through. This is what the Greeks called a dryad. And this is the same for everything out there. In animism, everything has spirit. Everything has life, intelligence. And this is what the Fae are. And of course, culture changes them. And as we get, how we interpret them depends on really, not just on the stories that we know about them, that we are taught, how we perceive them, but also on how that is ingrained. Hence, I talked about those two bikers seeing the puka as such. Now, the most fascinating thing is that down in the west coast country of England, you used to see black shuck, a big black dog. But that changed. That black dog changed into a cat.
Yeah.
So when people talk about seeing Surrey puma or the beast of Bodmin, you have to also take into account that what people are seeing may not actually be physical. It's the same old story, but the form has changed.
I've got an interesting comment on that, Gavin.
Okay.
Many years ago now, I lived in St. Column Major in Cornwall, and I was involved with local UFO investigations. And I got a phone call. I got a phone call from the police.
I'm about to show you something.
So am I. I've got it poised here. Where something had got into the zoo and cut the wallabies in half.
I remember that.
And and had tried to dig its way into a lion's cage. When I visited, I took a photograph. I haven't got the photographs of the paw prints now, but I do still have. You can't see it very well, unfortunately. It's a photograph showing. It's a photograph showing the wire of the cage there, and the hole where something had tried to dig in. Yeah. And the vet was called out because the lion was sitting at the back of the cage, shivering and with his hair falling out.
Oh,
a male lion is just described as being in absolute terror.
One of the things I mentioned earlier was Thomas the Rhymer and the ballad, because Thomas the Rhymer describes basically a fairy abduction where Thomas the Rhymer is abducted by the Queen of the Fairies, sees a bright light, walks in, and there's the food there, and he eats the food, suggests he actually has let's just say intimate relations with the Queen of the Fairies, and when he comes back, the world has moved on.
Yeah.
Now, the fascinating thing about that is that's very similar to other stories.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to show you a picture. And there is an interesting correlation with fairy abduction with alien abduction, which is why I put this image. This is I used to have a very, very much clearer image of showing an elf next to a toadstool and then an alien next to a flying saucer with a beam of light coming down, which are actually the same image. It's about interpretation.
Yep.
Doesn't mean the thing isn't real. It's about how we interpret the experience with the fairy or the alien as such. So when you look at a grey alien, you've got to ask a question. What is it the person is actually experiencing? Are they experiencing meeting an elf, or are they meeting a grey alien? And really, is it really what these are in the first place? Are they having, because you'll find many people, when they talk about these UFO abduction experience, they talk about having a spiritual experience, that it's changed their life in some way. And that what is going on, this is what is actually going on. They're not actually, yes, there are physical things going on with it as well, which seem to manifest, which we don't understand. But certainly there is also this other aspect to it. And of course, it changes. Originally, people, I remember there was a strange, you'll remember this, there was a strange cult which was Venusian and used to collect the energy. They talked about them coming from Venusians, then they were coming from other planets, and now we talk about them coming from other dimensions. So our viewpoint changes of what it is we are experiencing.
Yeah.
As such. And this is what you see when you look at the Fae. They change. It goes from being the black dog to the black cat. So the first forms that I was talking about were these lower elemental ones. Now they are on an animal level. Yes, they're intelligent, they are amoral, and when you're dealing with them, you only really deal with them when you have to. And every bit of traditional fairy lore tells you that. You don't go looking for them. You only basically, you react to them. You react to their presence when they appear. If you go to one of their sites here in Ireland, if you're doing ritual, everybody here who does ritual and magical practice out in the countryside in the evening knows the first thing you do is you leave offerings to the fairy folk, to the she. Because otherwise you can guarantee your ritual's going to get screwed up. Things are going to go wrong. Things are going to fall over because they're going to make sure you know they are there. And they're attracted to that energy. Simple.
And if you can do it in Gaelic, so much the better. We used to do a dinner na she dan and vanak vande dan and leave agus lean. O people of the she, the fairy folk, the blessings of the goddess Dan are upon you and upon us. We'd always start off with that.
So every time we've been in a situation where we've had to work with them, it's like we said at 4 with the horses, and I had to redirect the fairy path around the buildings, putting in a bottle and actually using copper rivets to divert the energy around, because I'm also a dowser. So the second type of fairy is the higher form, and they are generally ancestral. They're genus loci, but they're often also, they do actually end up becoming gods and goddesses. So, for example, what is initially a spirit of a river, over here we have the River Boyne, who is, of course, also a goddess. She's also a genus loci, a spirit of a place.
Yep. Okay, folks, we're at just gone 8:30 now.
Are we? Well,
oh, we are indeed, yes.
Already.
Time has flown by, as I'm sure your audience will be happy to confirm. Okay, I don't think we've got any particularly pressing questions. However, if people do have any further questions they'd like to ask you, what's the best way for them to get in contact with you?
They can drop us an email. I will put it up here.
Oh, thanks. Yeah.
So at the end of this, you come to one of two conclusions. Either we know what we're talking about, or we have definitely been kissing and snogging the Blarney Stone too much.
By the way, if you come to Ireland, do not kiss the Blarney Stone.
The New Zealand experience.
Yes. Oh, by the way, the Blarney Stone is where the Norman knights used to piss.
So I'm going to finish off very quickly, if people don't mind, with the New Zealand experience of what happened. Now, so we were very lucky to be at the first Open Pagan Festival in New Zealand back in 2002. And we got on site. It was absolutely wonderful. On the Saturday evening, it was on up the Coromandel Peninsula, and we were on this piece of land there. And at the top of the piece of land, on top of the hill, it was woodland and a valley. There was actually a Maori retreat centre. So,
and by the way, the burning house.
Yeah. Well, let me explain what happened. As we came onto the site, there was a house burning on the corner of the land, and the firemen were just standing there watching it burn down. And there was very clearly a couple of Maori elders there, and we didn't really think much of it. So the Saturday night before the main ritual, we had the local tohanga, which is the local Maori spirit man, come and do a ceremony in the bend of a river there. It went on until Monday evening. It started to get near twilight, and we're sitting in this, like it's a valley with a road down the middle, and there's woodland on one side, and there's a river in there. And as we're getting towards twilight, I get this real desire to wander along back to where the tohanga had done the ceremony. And as I get in through the woods into the bend in the river, I swear I can hear singing. And I just think, now it must be the water. I wander back. Now, there are basically 5 of us sitting on a bench and table, like you get in pubs. And we're sitting talking, and it's getting darker. And then suddenly, one of the Kiwi girls, New Zealand girls, I don't think we're alone. And we begin to hear the same singing that I'd heard earlier. And we're all going, can you hear that? Yeah, I can hear that. Can you hear that? Yeah, I can hear that. And it's really, really odd.
I'd gone up to the porta potties, and the moment I came out, the singing became incredibly loud. It filled the whole valley.
It filled the valley. And it was, well, it began to fill the valley. As it's getting darker, we're looking across. We're trying to find where the singing's coming from. And this car has come down the trackway, down the lane. And the guy winds down the window, and I walk up. I said, "Can you hear that?" He said, "Yeah, I'm from the other side of the campsite. I'm trying to find out where the singing's coming from too, the chanting." So we managed to persuade him to let us all in the car. So now there is basically 6 of us crammed in this car, driving around this site. We got up to the top, and by this time it's dark. And we're up at the Maori Sanctuary, and we've been very, very careful. You're pretty careful around Maori because they will eat you if you upset them, figuratively speaking. So no, sanctuary's quiet. The meeting house is quiet. But we can hear the singing coming up from the valley now. So Janet decides to scream down. We actually think it's physical.
I think it's kids playing. So I thought, right, they won't understand Gaelic. So I thought, I'm going to yell in Gaelic. So I yelled at the top of my voice, Céad Míle Fáilte, which means 100,000 welcomes. At which point, women's voices start calling back to me.
And it's in Maori.
And they're singing, and it's in Maori. So I write down phonetically what the women are saying.
We drive back down to the valley. The guy leaves. We sit on the bench. The singing is still coming out the woodland where we were sitting, from where the river is. And one of the girls goes, the Kiwi girls goes, "I don't think we're alone." I look across and I see lights. Now, again, there are cave dwelling, basically, light bugs there, but there's nothing which is going to cause light. I see lights, but that's not what everybody else is seeing, is it, Jan? Everybody else starts to see figures along the tree line. 200
miles are coming out of the tree.
It grows a bit. It's gone from 100 up to...
No, it was 200.
Right the way along the line of the tree line. All the way along. People are seeing it. Everybody's going, "Can you see that? I can see that. Can you see that?"
At which point, the Maori girl who's with us does the traditional greeting.
So
you show the back of your neck.
She takes a branch, she cuts it. She says, "We've got to do this properly. These are ancestral spirits." She goes over and she goes and lays it down and shows the back of her neck. I see her put the branch down. I see the branch disappear into the woods.
I see an old man come out and take the branch in his hands and pull it back into the woods.
Right.
He's got tattoos all over his face.
Now, there's 5 of us, at which point we go, okay. The chanting starts to tone down. The organisers of the event, they turn up because they're picking up the chuck wagon and picking us up. And they think, "What's going on?" Because we can hear the chanting. As we came in, I said, "We'll tell you when we get back to the bed and breakfast," because that's where we were staying, off-site. Because it's been getting really wild. Now, the 2 Kiwi girls there, they decided they were staying on site the night. And we said, "You're going to be okay with all this?" And they said, "Yeah, fine." We're still getting our heads around all of this.
So we go back to the bed and breakfast, get up the next morning, and we talking to the woman who runs it.
So I ask her, is there anything odd going on at that site? She said, "No, not that, apart from the fact they've been burning down the old Maori Queen's house."
Okay.
They had been doing ceremony for the week leading up, calling the ancestors. Then you have a tow hanger come on site from another tribe. and it wakens them all up again, which is what had happened.
They called the ancestors. The ancestors came.
Right.
Yep.
This doesn't end. That's just it.
It gets better.
So when we get back to Tracy's house in Auckland, Janet says, I've got to get translated this. What these people, you know, what.
Allow me to take over.
So this
So
is
what happens is our friend Tracy phones up a friend of hers who
the
is
hanger.
a Maori tohanger, medicine man, explains what happened, and she says, Janet wrote it down phonetically. Can you tell Janet what these words mean? And she tells the tohanger what the words meant. Oh, that's easy, he says. It means many, 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 many welcomes.
They've been
I know that in Gaelic, 100,000 welcomes.
They've been translated into Maori and sent back.
Okay.
Oh, and people, by the way, Gavin, want you to put the email in there.
It's up.
It's up, is it?
So that.
Yeah,
right.
sorry, can I just say...
There's 7 witnesses to this.
Hang on, he wants to say
Yeah.
so. Yes, darling.
Hello. Yeah, we can't actually see the email. Can you just confirm it for us, Gavin?
Yes, hang on. I'm just going to put it up again. Farrar@aircom.net. And that's gone directly to Centre for Pagan Studies on this. I don't think it's gone.
Gavin, you're sending it to me. You need
Yeah,
to send it
it's
to
sent-
everyone.
Okay, everyone in meeting.
Yeah.
Okay, going back up again.
And also earlier, I pasted an email address, which please don't send an email to that person. It's a client that I've just been dealing with, and I pasted his email address by mistake.
I've done that. So we
Okay,
have to go.
folks, we're going to need to draw to a close.
Thanks, Pinata. Thank you.
We're going to need to draw to a close because we're running out of recording time.
Yeah.
Janet, Gavin, it's on behalf of everybody here. It's been absolutely fantastic talk. I've been watching people's expressions and they've been riveted. Thank you so very, very much.
My pleasure.
And
Please, everybody, show your appreciation by donating to the Doreen Valiente Foundation.
Oh,
thank you kindly.
Please.
And welcome to all the members that I see. We've seen new members here. That have
Yes.
time. So thank you very much.
Yes.
And Hob sends his love.
Oh, thank you.
No, it seems I have to feed a dog over the weekend.
Oh, yes.
Thank you, everybody. Blessed be.
Take care.
Blessed be.
Bye.
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 Blessed be. Thank you.
Thank you.
Blessed be everyone. Thank you.
Bye.
Blessed be everyone. Thanks everyone. Thanks to the organisers as well. Thank
Blessed
you.
be. Thank you.
Blessed be everyone.
Blessed be everyone. Thank you.
Blessed be.
Blessed be. Thank you.